For my birthday, Mom sent me the same text she sent last year. Same words, same typo. I checked. She didn't even retype it. I sent back, "Thanks, Mom," and sat in my car for 40 minutes. My name's Elliot. I'm 32, and I want to tell you about the moment I realized my mother had been phoning it in on loving me for probably my entire adult life. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean she literally copy-pasted a birthday text from the year before, typo and all, and sent it to me like I wouldn't notice. Like I was a client she was sending a quarterly newsletter to. "Happy birthday, sweetie. Hope your year is amazing." That was it. Same message. Same wrong version of your. Same single E in sweetie. I know because I scrolled up and compared them side by side while sitting in the parking lot of a Home Depot, and I sat there for 40 minutes staring at my phone like it had just told me I had 6 months to live. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I grew up in Ridgeway, South Carolina, which is one of those towns where everybody knows everybody and most of them are related. My mom, Francine, was the kind of woman who could light up a room when she wanted to and make you feel like furniture when she didn't. She had this ability to make you feel like the most important person in the world for about 11 seconds, and then forget you existed for the next 6 weeks. Growing up, it was me and my younger sister, Sutton, and our dad, Boone, who passed when I was 19. Heart attack at 51. Just dropped in the garage while changing a tire on a Saturday morning. No warning. No goodbye. Just gone. After Dad died, things shifted. Sutton was 16 at the time and still living at home, so she became the center of Mom's universe by default. I was already a sophomore at Clemson, working 2 jobs to cover what my scholarships didn't, and I think in Mom's mind, I had already left the nest. Like I'd graduated from being her son into being an acquaintance she shared some DNA with. Meanwhile, Sutton got everything. Not in a malicious way, at least not at first. Mom just poured all her remaining emotional energy into one kid, and it wasn't me. I didn't resent Sutton for it. She was a teenager who'd just lost her dad. She needed Mom. I got that. What I didn't get was why Mom seemed to actively avoid connecting with me after that. Phone calls got shorter. Visits felt like obligations. When I graduated college, she came to the ceremony but spent most of it on the phone with Sutton, who hadn't wanted to make the drive. When I got my first real job as a civil engineer at a firm in Charleston, Mom said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," in the same tone you'd use if someone told you they'd found a decent parking spot. When Sutton got accepted to a cosmetology program in Columbia, Mom threw a party. An actual party. With a cake that said "Future Boss Babe" in pink frosting. Look, I'm not keeping score. Okay, I'm a little bit keeping score. But the point is, the pattern had been building for over a decade, and I kept telling myself it was in my head, that I was being sensitive. That Mom loved me. She just showed it differently. That's what therapists call a coping mechanism, and what I call lying to yourself with fancier words. I met my wife, Darcy, when I was 26. She was an ER nurse who had exactly 0 patience for nonsense, which was probably why she liked me, because I was the least nonsense person she'd ever met. Darcy was the first one who actually said out loud what I'd been feeling for years. We were driving back from a Thanksgiving at Mom's house, and she just looked at me and said, "Elliot, your mom treats you like a neighbor she's polite to. You know that, right?" And I said, "She's just not great at showing affection." And Darcy said, "She showed plenty of affection to Sutton. She showed affection to the dog. She showed more affection to the pecan pie than she showed to you." She wasn't wrong. Mom had literally hugged the pie dish when Sutton brought it in, cradled it like a newborn, told Sutton she was a genius. I'd brought a 7-layer dip that I'd spent 2 hours on, and Mom had moved it to the back of the counter to make room for a bag of store-bought rolls. But I kept showing up. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering. I'd drive 3 hours each way, bring something thoughtful, ask about her life, help around the house, fix whatever was broken. And every time, I'd leave feeling like I'd just attended a party I wasn't invited to. Sutton would be lounging on the couch, getting her nails talked about while I was under the kitchen sink replacing a garbage disposal, and Mom would walk right past me to ask Sutton if she wanted more sweet tea. The birthday text thing had actually happened before, but I hadn't caught it. Darcy was the one who noticed. On my 31st birthday, Mom sent me a text at 2 in the afternoon. Not morning. Afternoon. Like she'd just remembered sometime between lunch and her stories. "Happy birthday, sweetie. Hope your year is amazing." I showed it to Darcy, and she said, "That's sweet." And I believed her because I wanted to. Then on my 32nd birthday, Almost exactly a year later, same text came in. 2:17 in the afternoon. I wasn't even going to look at it closely, but Darcy grabbed my phone, squinted at the screen, and said, "Wait, didn't she send you this exact same message last year?" I said, "No way." She said, "Scroll up." So I did, and there it was. Word for word. Same misspelling. Same wrong punctuation. Same everything. She hadn't even retyped it. She'd gone into our text thread, found last year's message, and sent it again. Or maybe her phone auto-suggested it. Either way, she didn't care enough to write me a new sentence. One sentence. For her son's birthday. I sent back, "Thanks, Mom," and put my phone down on the center console. And then I just sat there. Darcy had gone inside the Home Depot to pick up drawer pulls for the kitchen reno we were doing, and I told her I'd wait in the car. That was a lie. I mean, I did wait in the car, but the reason wasn't that I didn't want to go inside. The reason was that I couldn't move. 40 minutes. That's how long I sat there. The engine was off. It was August in South Carolina, which means the inside of that car was roughly the temperature of a convection oven, and I didn't care. I just sat there, sweating and staring at those two identical texts, and something inside me finally cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like a dam that's been holding back water for 13 years and finally gets that first fracture line running through the concrete. I wasn't sad exactly. I was just done. Done pretending it didn't hurt. Done pretending she'd change. Done pretending that showing up and being reliable and being the son who fixed things and never complained was eventually going to be enough. When Darcy came back to the car with 2 bags and a confused look on her face, I said, "I think I'm done with my mom." She set the bags in the back seat, got in, looked at me, and said, "Okay, then we're done. No argument." "No, are you sure?" "No, but she's your mother." "Just, okay, then we're done." That's when I knew I'd married the right person. But here's the thing about being done with someone. You don't just flip a switch and suddenly the pain goes away. You flip the switch, and then you have to sit in the dark for a while and figure out where all the furniture is. After the birthday text incident, I didn't make some grand announcement. I didn't call Mom and tell her off. I just quietly stopped initiating. No more check-in calls. No more offers to drive up and fix things around her house. No more being the first one to reach out. I wanted to see how long it would take her to notice. Darcy said I was running an experiment, and she wasn't wrong. I told myself I just needed some space, but deep down I was testing a theory I'd been afraid to test for years. The theory was simple. If I stopped chasing my mother's attention, she wouldn't come looking for it. And I was right. 3 weeks went by. Nothing. No call. No text. No "how are you?" I checked my phone more than I want to admit during those 3 weeks. Every time it buzzed, some stupid, hopeful part of me thought it might be her. It was never her. It was spam calls and fantasy football updates and Darcy sending me pictures of kitchen backsplash tiles. For weeks. 5 weeks. 6. Nothing. 7 weeks in, I got a text. From Sutton. Not Mom. Sutton. And it said, "Hey, Mom wants to know if you're coming for Thanksgiving. She told me to ask you." She told me to ask you. Not, "She wants to talk to you." Not, "She misses you." She outsourced the question to my sister like I was a vendor she needed to confirm a delivery with. I stared at that text for a long time too, but this time I wasn't sad. I was just tired. I wrote back, "Tell Mom that if she wants to know, she can ask me herself." Sutton responded with a thumbs up emoji, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously anyone in that family took my feelings. 2 days later, Mom called. First time in almost 2 months. I let it ring twice because I needed a second to breathe, and then I answered. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing. She opened with, "Sutton says you're being difficult about Thanksgiving." Difficult? I was being difficult. For wanting my mother to call me herself. I took a breath and said, "I'm not being difficult, Mom. I just think that if you want to invite me to Thanksgiving, you could pick up the phone yourself instead of sending Sutton as a messenger." There was a pause, and then she said, "Well, I'm calling now, aren't I?" Like that was supposed to be a victory lap. I told her I wasn't sure about Thanksgiving yet. She said, "Oh, so Darcy's the one putting ideas in your head." And that's when the crack in the dam got a little wider. I said, "Nobody is putting ideas in my head. I'm a 32-year-old man." She laughed. Actually laughed. Not a mean laugh. More like an "oh please" laugh, which might have been worse. She said, "Elliot, you've always been the sensitive one. Your father was the same way." And then, almost as an afterthought, "Just let me know about Thanksgiving." Sutton's bringing her boyfriend, and I need a head count for the turkey. That was it. That was the whole call. No, I've missed talking to you. No. Is everything okay? I haven't heard from you in 2 months. Just Thanksgiving logistics and a casual dismissal of everything I was feeling. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, and Darcy came in and sat next to me and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "You okay?" And I said, "She compared me to Dad. Like being sensitive was a disease he gave me." Darcy put her hand on my knee and said, "Your dad sounded like a wonderful man. If being like him is the worst thing about you, I think you're doing fine." I almost lost it right there, but I held on. Barely. I ended up going to Thanksgiving because I'm an idiot. Darcy tried to talk me out of it, but I had this delusion that maybe being face to face would be different. That maybe Mom would see me in person and remember she had a son, not just a daughter and a handyman. We drove the 3 hours to Ridgeway, brought a pumpkin cheesecake that Darcy had spent all morning on, and walked in to find the house already full. Sutton was there with her boyfriend, Grady, who was exactly the kind of guy you'd expect someone named Grady to be. Big handshake, small vocabulary, smiled a lot without saying anything interesting. Mom was fussing over them like they were visiting royalty. She had Sutton's baby pictures out on the coffee table, which was a new one. When we walked in, Mom said, "Oh, Elliot, good, you made it. Can you check the oven? I think the temperature's off." No hug. No happy to see you. Just a maintenance request. Darcy squeezed my hand so hard I thought she might break a finger. I checked the oven. It was fine. The temperature was exactly what it was supposed to be, which was both literally and metaphorically appropriate. Dinner was the usual performance. Mom spent the entire meal asking Sutton about her salon, about Grady, about their apartment. She asked Grady about his tire shop job, like he was describing Nobel Prize research. Meanwhile, I'd just been promoted to project lead at my firm, overseeing a $14 million infrastructure project, and nobody asked me a thing until Darcy said, "Elliot actually just got a big promotion." Mom said, "Oh, that's great, honey," without looking up from the green bean casserole. Same tone, same dismissal. After dinner, I was in the kitchen doing dishes because of course I was, and Sutton came in for more wine. She said, "Mom told me you were being weird on the phone." I said, "I was asking to be treated like a member of this family." She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled them. She said, "Elliot, you always make things about you. Mom loves you. She just doesn't know how to deal with your whole intense thing." "My whole intense thing?" I said. "She sent me the same birthday text 2 years in a row. Didn't even retype it." Sutton shrugged. "So? She's 63. She's not great with phones." I could have argued. I could have laid out 13 years of evidence. But I've been arguing my case to a jury that didn't want to hear it for over a decade. So I just said, "Yeah, maybe you're right," and finished the dishes. The real breaking point came after dessert. We were all in the living room, and Mom pulled out a photo album, one I'd never seen before. She'd put it together over the past year, she said. A collection of her favorite family memories. She started flipping through it with Sutton and Grady, narrating every picture. Sutton's first dance recital, Sutton's prom, Sutton's graduation, Sutton at the beach, Sutton's first day at the salon. Sutton, 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 page after page. I sat there waiting for a picture of me, or Dad, or the 4 of us together. 23 pages. Not one picture of me. Not one. The entire album was a shrine to one daughter, and the other child didn't exist in it at all. Darcy noticed before I did. She was sitting next to me, and I felt her go still. That kind of still where you know someone is furious, but holding it together. She looked at me, and I could see it in her eyes. She was asking if I was okay. I wasn't. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door and leaned against the sink and just stood there breathing. I could hear them laughing in the living room. Mom was telling some story about Sutton's 8th grade talent show. I looked at myself in the mirror and said, out loud, very quietly, "You are not crazy. This is real, and you deserve better than this." When I came back to the living room, Darcy had her coat on. She said, "We should get going, long drive." Mom didn't protest. She hugged Sutton goodbye, like she was leaving for war. She waved at us from the porch. Waved. Like we were the pizza delivery guys pulling out of the driveway. We were about 30 minutes into the drive home when Darcy said, "There wasn't a single picture of you in that album." I said, "I know." She said, "Not one." I said, "I know." She was quiet for a minute, and then she said, "Elliot, I love you." and I need you to hear me when I say this. You are not the problem. You have never been the problem. And you don't have to keep walking into that house and pretending it doesn't destroy you every time you leave. I didn't say anything. I just drove. And somewhere around mile marker 47 on Interstate 26, I started crying. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet tears running down my face in the dark while my wife held my hand across the center console and didn't say a word. And that was the last Thanksgiving I ever spent in that house. The weeks after Thanksgiving were rough. I'd love to tell you I walked away from that house and immediately felt liberated, like some weight had been lifted and suddenly birds were singing and the sun was brighter. That's not what happened. What happened was I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out my insides with a melon baller and left the shell standing. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner. I went to bed. Repeat. Darcy watched me with that quiet concern she has, the kind where she doesn't push, but you know she's ready the second you need her. Christmas came and went. I didn't go to Mom's. Didn't call. She sent a group text to me and Sutton that said, "Merry Christmas. Love you girls." Girls. Plural. Which either meant she'd lumped me in with Sutton or she'd meant to send it just to Sutton and accidentally included me. Either way, it was the kind of thing that would have been funny if it didn't make me want to throw my phone into the Cooper River. I told Darcy I wanted to try therapy. She didn't do a victory lap about it, which I appreciated. She just said, "I think that's a good idea," and handed me her laptop to find someone. I found a guy named Dr. Ames who had an office about 10 minutes from our house and an online profile that said he specialized in family estrangement and adult children of emotionally unavailable parents. That sounded like a personal attack, but I booked the appointment anyway. Dr. Ames was in his 60s, had a beard like a Civil War general, and talked like he had all the time in the world. First session, I spent 45 minutes giving him the background, and he just listened. At the end, he said something that hit me like a freight train. He said, "Elliot, it sounds like you've been auditioning for a role your mother already cast someone else in. And no matter how good your performance is, you're never going to get the part." I sat with that for about 10 seconds and then said, "Well, that's devastating." He said it is, but it's also the beginning of something, because once you stop auditioning, you can start performing for an audience that actually wants to see you. Therapy cracked things open in ways I wasn't expecting. I started recognizing patterns I'd been blind to. The way I'd always been the fixer in every relationship, not just with Mom. The way I said yes to everything at work because I was terrified of being seen as difficult or ungrateful. The way I downplayed my own accomplishments because I'd been trained to believe they didn't matter. Dr. Ames called it emotional invisibility conditioning, which sounds like something out of a superhero movie, but is actually just what happens when your parent consistently treats you like background noise. You start to believe you are background noise. The first thing that started to shift was my work. I'd been a good engineer for years, solid and reliable, but I'd always let other people take credit, step into the spotlight, present the big ideas. After a few months of therapy, something changed. We had a meeting about a new municipal project, a waterfront revitalization that was going to be the biggest thing our firm had done in a decade. My boss, a guy named Shepard who'd been in the industry for 30 years, asked if anyone had thoughts on the drainage challenges. Normally, I'd have waited for someone else to speak first. Instead, I raised my hand and laid out a solution I'd been thinking about for weeks. A tiered bioswale system integrated with permeable paving that would handle stormwater without the massive underground infrastructure the initial plan called for. The room went quiet. Shepard looked at me for a long second and said, "Elliot, why haven't you been talking like this in every meeting?" I didn't have a good answer for that. But from that point on, I started talking. Things moved fast after that. Shepard put me on the waterfront project as co-lead, which was a massive step up. I was working longer hours, but for the first time in years, the work felt like it meant something. I wasn't just doing a job. I was building something. The project got local press coverage because of the environmental angle, and our firm's name was in the paper. My name was in the paper. Darcy framed the article and put it on the wall in our home office next to her nursing certifications. I told her she didn't need to do that. She said, "Somebody in your family should be proud of you on a wall. Might as well be us." Around the same time, Darcy and I found out she was pregnant. We'd been trying for about a year, and honestly I'd started to worry it wasn't going to happen. But one morning in late February, she came out of the bathroom holding the test with this look on her face, half smiling, half crying, and said, guess we're doing this. I picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, and for about 5 minutes, everything in the world was perfect. No complicated family dynamics, no emotional baggage, just two people who loved each other finding out they were going to have a kid. The pregnancy news spread through our circle fast. Darcy's family was over the moon. Her mom, Jolene, was already planning a baby shower before we'd even had the first ultrasound. Her dad, Hank, called me and said, "Welcome to the club, son. It's the best job you'll ever have, and nobody trains you for it." I'd known Darcy's family for 6 years, and they'd treated me like their own from day one. Jolene remembered my birthday. Hank asked about my projects. They saved me a seat at the table without being asked. Being around them was both wonderful and painful, because it showed me exactly what I'd been missing. I debated whether to tell Mom about the pregnancy. Darcy said it was my call, and she'd support whatever I decided. I went back and forth for 2 weeks. Part of me wanted to tell her, to give her one more chance to show up, to care, to be a grandmother. Part of me knew exactly how it would go. In the end, I texted her. Simple message. "Hey Mom, wanted you to know that Darcy and I are expecting. Due in October." She wrote back 4 hours later. "Oh wow, congrats. Tell Darcy I said hi." That was it. No follow-up questions. No, how is she feeling? No, can I come visit? No, I'm going to be a grandmother. Just a sentence and a half that could have been a response to literally any news. I could have told her I bought a new lawnmower and gotten the same reaction. Sutton texted me later that week. "Mom told me about the baby. That's awesome." Then, 2 minutes later, "Also, Mom's been having some money issues. Might need some help with the house payment this month. Just FYI." And there it was. I hadn't heard from my mother in months, and the first real communication chain after my baby announcement came with a request for money attached, delivered through my sister like a ransom note. I showed Darcy the texts. She read them, set my phone down, and said one word. "No." I said, "I wasn't going to." She said, "I know, but I wanted to say it out loud so you'd hear it from someone other than yourself." I didn't send money. I didn't respond to the request. What I did do was keep building my life. The waterfront project was ahead of schedule. Darcy's belly was growing. We'd painted the nursery a soft sage green, and Hank had built a crib by hand in his workshop. Dr. Ames and I were meeting every 2 weeks, and each session felt like removing another brick from a wall I'd built around myself. I was learning to take up space, to let myself be seen, to accept that the family I was born into didn't define the family I was building. One night in July, Darcy and I were sitting on our back porch, and she had her feet in my lap, and the cicadas were going absolutely berserk the way they do in a South Carolina summer. She looked at me and said, "You're different. You know that?" I said, "Different how?" She said, "You laugh more. You stand up straighter. You talk about your work like you're actually proud of it." I thought about that for a second and said, "I think I just stopped waiting for permission to matter." She smiled and said, "Well, it looks good on you." And right there on that porch, with the cicadas screaming and the humidity thick enough to swim through, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt like enough. Our son, Boone, was born on October 9th. Named him after my dad. 7 pounds, 11 ounces, full head of dark hair, and a scream that could shatter crystal. When the nurse put him on Darcy's chest, and he stopped crying and just stared up at her with those enormous eyes, I thought my heart was going to physically explode. I stood there in the delivery room and made myself a promise. I said it in my head, but I meant it with every cell in my body. This kid would never wonder if his father loved him. He would never sit in a parking lot analyzing a text message. He would never have to earn my attention or audition for my approval. He was going to know, every single day of his life, that he mattered. Darcy's family descended like the world's most enthusiastic support team. Jolene showed up with a week's worth of frozen meals. Hank came by every other day to hold the baby while Darcy napped. We were exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than we'd ever been. Mom didn't come, didn't call, didn't send a gift or a card. Sutton texted congratulations and said she'd visit soon. She didn't. About a week later, Mom sent a text that said, "Heard the baby came. Hope all is well. Send pics when you get a chance." Heard the baby came. Like she was getting secondhand intel about a weather event in another state. I didn't respond. We both knew what it meant, and we were both too in love with our son to let it ruin the moment. Life with a newborn is chaotic, but there was a strange clarity that came with it. All the noise in my head about Mom, about whether I was being too sensitive, it got quieter. Because now there was this tiny human who needed me completely, and I didn't have the bandwidth to keep mourning a relationship that had been dead for years. Dr. Ames said sometimes becoming a parent is what finally gives you permission to stop being a child. The waterfront project wrapped up in November, 2 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. Shepard took me out for a steak dinner and told me the firm was creating a new senior associate position and he wanted me to take it. Came with a significant raise, an equity stake in the firm, and my name on the door. Not literally on the door, but on the company's letterhead, which in the engineering world is basically the same thing. I called Darcy from the restaurant parking lot, and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then she said, "Boone just spit up on me, and I don't even care. This is amazing." I was in the best place I'd been in my entire adult life. Great wife, healthy son, career on fire, house that was finally starting to feel like a home. And that's exactly when Mom decided to show up. It started with a phone call in early December. Unknown number, which I normally don't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Sutton. She was calling from a friend's phone because her own was shut off. She was talking fast and sounded stressed. She said, "Elliot, I need to talk to you about Mom. Things are bad." I said, "What do you mean bad?" She said Mom's house was in foreclosure. She'd been behind on the mortgage for almost a year. She'd taken out a second loan against the house a while back and couldn't keep up with the payments. The bank was giving her 90 days to get current or they'd start proceedings. Sutton said she'd been helping as much as she could, but Grady had left her 3 months ago. The salon she'd been working at had closed, and she was barely keeping her own rent paid. I listened to all of this and felt exactly two emotions at the same time. Sadness, because whatever our issues, it was still my mother and I didn't want her to lose her home. And a heavy, bitter recognition that I knew exactly what was coming next. Sutton said, "Mom needs help, Elliot. She won't ask you herself because she's too proud, but she needs help." I said, "Sutton, she's not too proud. She just doesn't think of me unless she needs something." There was a long silence on the line, and then Sutton said, "That's not fair." I said, "She didn't come when my son was born. She didn't call. She didn't even send a card. But now she needs money and suddenly I exist again? Tell me how that's fair." Sutton didn't have an answer for that. She just said, "She's still our mom, Elliot." And I said, "Yeah, she is. And I've been trying to get her to act like it for 13 years. After I hung up, I told Darcy everything. She listened, arms crossed, standing in the kitchen with that expression she gets when she's processing something and you better not interrupt. When I was done, she said, "What are you thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking that I want to help because it's the right thing to do, but I don't want to be a checkbook they open when it's convenient and close when they don't need me anymore." Darcy nodded and said, "So don't be. If you're going to do something, do it on your terms, not theirs." I spent the next 2 weeks thinking about it. I talked to Dr. Ames, who reminded me that setting conditions isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. I talked to Hank, who said something simple but wise. He said, "Son, you can help somebody without letting them walk on you. You just have to make sure the ground rules are clear before the first step." I talked to a financial advisor at the firm who helped me understand what it would actually take to bring Mom's mortgage current. It was a lot. Not an amount that would bankrupt us, but an amount that would mean real sacrifice, delaying our own plans. And then I had an idea. Not a revenge idea, not a petty one, just a very clear, very direct one. If I was going to help save Mom's house, I wasn't going to do it from the shadows while she pretended I didn't exist. She was going to have to look me in the face. She was going to have a real conversation. And for once in my life, I was going to say everything I'd been holding in. I called Sutton back the following week and told her I was willing to help, but I had conditions. First, Mom had to call me herself, not text, not send Sutton. She had to pick up the phone and call her son. Second, we were going to have a sit-down conversation in person at her house where we talked about everything. Not just the money, everything. The years of being ignored, the birthday texts, the Thanksgiving album, the baby she never came to meet. All of it. And third, she had to meet Boone. She had a grandson she'd never laid eyes on, and if she wanted my help, she was going to sit in a room with him and reckon with what she'd missed. Sutton was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She's not going to like that." I said, "She doesn't have to like it. Those are my terms." Another pause. Then Sutton said, "I'll talk to her." I said, "No. She calls me. That's condition number one. And I hung up. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Mom. She was quiet when I answered, and for a second I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Elliot?" And I said, "Hi, Mom." And she said, with a voice that sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it, "Sutton told me you want to talk." I said, "I do." She paused again and said, "Okay. When?" I told her I'd drive up that Saturday. She said, "Okay." And then, almost like it cost her something to say, she added, "Bring the baby." I hung up and looked at Darcy, who'd been listening from across the room with Boone asleep on her shoulder. She raised an eyebrow and said, "She called?" I said, "She called." Darcy said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a second and said, "Like I'm about to walk into a final exam I've been studying for my whole life." She said, "You're going to do great." Then she kissed me on the forehead and said, "And if she starts anything, I'll be in the car with the engine running." That Saturday morning, I loaded up the car. Boone in the back seat in his car seat, staring at his own fist like it was the most fascinating object in the universe. Darcy rode with me, but said she'd stay in the car for the first part because this was something I needed to do with Mom alone. I didn't argue. I drove 3 hours with my hands tied on the wheel and a speech in my head that I'd rehearsed 100 times. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just ready. Mom was standing on the porch when I pulled into the driveway. She looked smaller than I remembered. She was wearing a cardigan I recognized from when I was a kid, this old olive green thing with wooden buttons that she used to wear when she sat on the porch with Dad. I turned off the engine, took a breath, and got out. She looked at the car seat in the back, and her face did something complicated. Not quite a smile, not quite tears. I unclipped Boone and held him against my chest and walked up the porch steps. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "He looks like your father." I said, "His name is Boone." That's when her face crumbled. She covered her mouth with one hand and said, "Oh, Elliot. Just my name. Nothing else." I didn't hug her. Not yet. I said, "Can we go inside?" She nodded and held the door open, and I carried my son into the house I grew up in and sat down on the couch where I used to watch cartoons with my dad on Saturday mornings. We sat in the living room. Me on the couch with Boone in my lap, Mom in the recliner across from me. Sutton wasn't there. I told her this was between me and Mom. The house looked tired. Paint peeling in the hallway, a water stain on the ceiling I hadn't noticed before, the kitchen faucet dripping in the silence. Mom clasped her hands in her lap and said, "I suppose you want to talk about the money." I said, "No, I want to talk about everything else first." She blinked. I could tell she'd prepared herself for a financial conversation, maybe some mild guilt, maybe a quick negotiation. She hadn't prepared for this. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to just listen. Can you do that?" She nodded slowly, like she wasn't sure she could but was going to try. So I told her. All of it. The years of feeling invisible. Driving 3 hours to fix things in her house, and never being asked how I was doing. The identical birthday texts and the 40 minutes in a parking lot. The Thanksgiving photo album with 23 pages and not a single picture of me. Telling her about my promotion and getting less enthusiasm than she showed for Sutton's lip gloss. Telling her I was going to be a father and getting back a response shorter than a spam email. Boone being born, the happiest day of my life, and his own grandmother not calling. I kept my voice steady the whole time. No yelling, no tears, just facts, delivered one after another, like laying bricks. And with each one, I watched my mother's face change. The defensiveness that had been there at the beginning, the slight lift of the chin, the "here we go" posture, it all melted. By the time I got to the part about Boone, she was crying. Quiet, steady crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and old. When I finished, I said, "I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because I spent 13 years pretending it didn't hurt me, and I can't do that anymore. I have a son now, and I need him to grow up in a family where people say what they mean and mean what they say, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Mom was quiet for a long time. Boone gurgled in my lap and grabbed my finger, which was the only sound in the house besides that dripping faucet. Then Mom said, "I didn't know." I said, "You didn't ask." She flinched at that, but she didn't argue. She said, "After your father died, I think something broke in me. Sutton was right there, and she needed me in ways I could understand. She was loud about it. You were always so quiet, Elliot. So self-sufficient. You never seemed to need anything." I said, I needed you, Mom. I just stopped asking because the answer was always no. That landed hard. She said, I'm so sorry. And I believed her. Not because the words were magic, but because of how she said them. Like they were being pulled out of her against years of pride and self-deception. She said, I don't know how to fix this. I said, you can start by being honest about what happened. Not just with me, with yourself. She looked at Boone, who'd fallen asleep against my chest with his fist curled around my collar. She said, can I hold him? I hesitated, because this moment felt like a line being drawn. On one side was everything before. On the other was whatever came next. I handed him over. She held him against her shoulder and closed her eyes and rocked him, and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in years. Recognition, not of the baby, but of what she'd missed. After a while, I said, about the house. She shook her head. She said, you don't have to. I didn't call you because of the house. I said, I know that's why Sutton called, but I'm not doing this for Sutton. I'm doing this because Dad would have wanted this house standing, and because Boone deserves to visit his grandmother in the place where his grandfather lived. She started crying again at that, and this time I let her. I told her I'd bring the mortgage current, but I had conditions that weren't about money. I wanted to hear from her regularly, not through Sutton. Real conversations. I wanted her to come to Charleston and meet Darcy's family and see the life I'd built. I wanted her to be a real grandmother, not a concept of one. And I told her if she slipped back into old patterns, I'd walk away. Not out of anger, out of respect for myself. She agreed to all of it. Whether she could keep those promises was another question, but in that moment, she agreed, and she meant it. Before I left, she asked me to wait. She went into the back bedroom and came out with a small cardboard box. She opened it on the kitchen table, and inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Photos of me as a baby, me and Dad in the backyard, me at my middle school science fair, me in my cap and gown at graduation. She said, I couldn't put these in the album. Every time I looked at them, I saw your father, and I couldn't handle it. She paused. I put Sutton in the album because looking at her didn't hurt. Looking at you always reminded me of what I lost. That wasn't an excuse. She knew it, and I knew it. But it was a reason. And sometimes a reason is enough to start building a bridge, even if the bridge takes a long time to finish. I took the box of photos with me. Darcy was waiting in the car with 2 cold coffees and a look on her face that said she'd been watching the house like a hawk for 90 minutes. I got in, put Boone in his car seat, and sat there for a second. She said, how'd it go? I said, she held the baby. She cried. She apologized. She showed me photos of Dad she'd been hiding because looking at them hurt too much. Darcy took that in, then said, and the house. I said, we're going to help. On our terms. She nodded. Good terms. I said, the best I could do. She said, then they're good enough. That was 8 months ago. Mom has called every Sunday since. Not every call is great. Some are awkward. Some are short. But she calls. She came to Charleston in the spring and held Boone in our backyard while Jolene served lemonade, and Hank showed her the crib he'd built. She cried again, but this time they were different tears. She and Darcy aren't best friends, but they're cordial, and Mom told Darcy her pumpkin cheesecake recipe was the best she'd ever had, which from Francine is basically a declaration of love. Sutton and I are in a better place too. We had our own conversation, a shorter one, where I told her that using me as a cash machine and a messenger service wasn't a relationship. She pushed back at first, but eventually she said, I think I got used to being the favorite, and I didn't think about what that meant for you. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. The house is still standing. Mom's making payments. Boone is crawling now and has a personality that's equal parts Darcy's stubbornness and my dad's curiosity. He pulls himself up on furniture and looks at you with this expression like he's trying to figure out how the whole world works. I look at him sometimes and think about that birthday text, the one that started all of this. Same words, same typo, copy-pasted like I was an item on a to-do list. It seems so small now. But sometimes the small things are the ones that finally make you pay attention. Last Sunday, Mom called, and at the end of the conversation she said, Happy Sunday, sweetheart. And the thing is, she said it like she meant it. Not copy-pasted, not recycled. Brand new, just for me. And that was enough.